The results from this year's local government elections have left the two main parties scrambling to put together coalition agreements. Parties have failed to achieve an outright majority in about 66 municipalities, including most of the metropolitan councils. It is now mainly up to the DA and ANC to lock in deals with smaller parties in areas such as Johannesburg, Tshwane, eThekwini and Nelson Mandela Bay. Let's discuss this then with Dr. Harlan Kluter from the School of Public Leadership at the University of Stellenbosch. Doctor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time on this Friday and welcome to News at Prime. So let's talk about the coalitions and the rise in the number of hung councils this year and what that tells us about the opinions of the electorate and where we are in our democratic process.
Thank you very much and good evening to you and good evening to all the viewers. I think it's a sign that the voters are saying we do not trust any one of the two bigger parties to give you 50% plus one. And it is saying to them, you know, get together in a room and thrash this out. I'm on record as saying that the best solution would be for the two biggest losers to get together and to govern. The problem is that if they try and lure smaller parties normally make big demands. And I don't think that it is fair on the electorate. So the electorate has said that we are not trusting either one of you with our 50% plus one vote. So get together and sort this thing out.
And just on that point then, because this has come up before. I was listening to Bantu Olomisa, in fact, speaking on Newzroom Afrika to Ayanda Nyati. I think it was yesterday morning where he was saying exactly what you're saying, that what needs to happen in most of these councils, he said, Cyril Ramaphosa, as leader of the ANC, needs to ring Helen Ziller, chair of the DA's Federal Council, have her sit down and say, this is how we should hash out a deal where perhaps the horse trading goes in this way, where you say, DA gives the ANC Johannesburg in exchange for Tshwane and so forth. Do you think that would be the easiest way to do it?
I think for me, I think we must apply science here. We must look at, in those councils, where do we have the best brains? If you look at the ANC and the DA, they have the institutional knowledge and they've got the intellectual capital between them. And so it is important that I think for stability and for good governance, that these two bigger parties, that they get together and see in a particular council, who do we have here that we can form a good government here. And I'm not saying keep the smaller parties out. If we have this type of horse trading, you know, that is not based on science, but on personalities, and then that's where the thing goes wrong. So I think we must take case by case, and where we have hung councils, and where we have neither the ANC or the DA that have scored a majority, the two of them should take the lead, and they should resist the temptation to keep the other one out. The voters want a government that can address the issue of inequality, poverty and unemployment and corruption. And so both of these parties, you know, if you listen to the ANC and the DA, I think that there's not so much difference between the two of them.
So does the political maturity exist, I wonder, to not only reach the agreements, but to sustain them? Because 5 years, as we've seen in Tshwane and Nelson Mandela Bay, is a very long time if the parties don't trust or agree with each other.
It's because they fall apart if it is not based on principles and a set of values. So we must come together with a set of principles. What is the principles of our agreement here? And you know, a coalition is like a marriage. You are in this for a long run, and so you need to also work out, what do we do when we disagree? And so the principle must be, what is it that we as political parties are going to do to take this community forward? And it's not about, and I really, they must prove us wrong. The ANC and the DA must show the maturity and govern in the interest of the people and not themselves. If one of them gangs up with the other smaller parties to keep the other one out, it's the highest form, I think, of immaturity. And so we need a coalition government of these two bigger parties based on principles and a common values and a determination to make sure that we get rid of poverty, unemployment and inequality, to work with the communities.
Should the coalition discussion process be more transparent? And by that I mean to say, perhaps have the parties consult more broadly on who to marry and what the terms should be of such a marriage?
I think the marriage, I think Salga put out a discussion document or a coalition framework about the values. I think that was yesterday. And so, yes, it demands, it's the voters that voted for them. And so the voters, their supporters must demand the DA and the ANC. Remember, we are not enemies here. People may have been very fierce in the run-up to the election, but the DA is not the enemy of the ANC. Neither is the ANC the enemy of the DA. If we start talking that language, then I'm afraid we have it wrong. We need to come together. South Africans want a government that is caring. South Africans are sick and tired of point fingers and mudslinging and dirty politics. We want to make sure, it's been almost 26 years. South Africans want a caring government, and especially at local government level, to address these issues of local economic development, building social cohesion amongst these communities, and building that social solidarity that the late Professor Sam-Peter Bland so eloquently talked about, building social solidarity and cohesion in communities. And so we really appeal to these the two biggest losers to really get their act together and show South Africa leadership.
You mentioned the terminology used there, the two biggest losers. J.C. Duarte, speaking on behalf of the ANC, as the results truly began to take shape, said they've dropped support, but they're not losers. Would you argue, though, that even though the ANC has maintained to get over 40% of the national vote, it is ultimately the biggest loser?
With love and respect to J.C. Duarte, the ANC is the DA has lost support locally, and I don't buy John Steenhuisen's argument that you must compare this to the 2019 election. The DA has lost support, and the ANC continues to lose support, and it must worry the ANC. And so the voters have not given the ANC the clear majority like in the past, and so they must eat humble pie and say, we don't have all the answers. And so I think one of the first things that we must get together is, one of the first principles of this agreement must be that we employ competent people to run the administration in local government. You see, when these smaller parties come in, and there's enough evidence of that, when the smaller parties come in, then they start dictating positions and who to employ and who gets what, and et cetera, et cetera. And so any coalition, these two biggest losers must be humble and gracious in defeat and say, okay, we didn't receive a majority. Now let's us work to make South Africa not good, but great.
Doctor, so good to speak to you. Dr. Harlan Klute from the School of Public Leadership at the University of Stellenbosch.